Hi, thank you for the introduction, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good evening. My name is Morgan Boncyk. I am a research associate at Purdue University. I am going to talk to you about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on food availability, price, and consumption in rural Kenya. And this is looking at variations by agroecological zone, market access, and gender. It is widely known that the pandemic has disrupted food systems worldwide and challenged food security at the household level. The first case of COVID-19 in Kenya was in early March of 2020. For this first wave, nation-level mitigation strategies were put in place. This included travel restrictions, closures, and gathering restrictions. Public transportation capacity was reduced, increasing transportation costs, and permits were required to move food. A nationwide curfew was put into place, food markets closed, decreased employment opportunities, and schools closed. Work previously presented has shown the impact of these mitigation strategies on the food system. In summary, there are impacts on the food system chain, decreasing food availability and impacting food environments. This decreasing food affordability and reducing food security and consumption. As a result of these measures, there are effects on Kenya's food system and food security. We propose that these effects may not be uniform, but have differential within country effects within various population groups. We expected these mitigation measures to vary by agroecological zone, which from here on out will be abbreviated by AEZ, distance to market, and by gender. Our study objective was to identify if differential impacts existed for the pandemic's mitigation strategies on food systems and household food security based on AEZ, market access, and gender. To do this, we used an existing sample frame of 121 rural communities representative of Kenya's major maize production areas to conduct tele-group interviews. These interviews look at the pathway through which the pandemic and their associated mitigation strategies affected food security, diet, food choices, and families' health in rural Kenya. These interviews were guided by the Food Systems for Diet and Nutrition Framework. We randomly selected 12 communities stratified by AEZ and distance to a major city as a proxy for market access. I identified communities as being near when they were within 2 hours of travel time. We conducted 24 group interviews among 72 participants in July 2020, 4 months after the mitigation measures began. A male and female group was conducted in each community with 3 participants each who varied in farm sizes, which was our proxy for socioeconomic status. Interviews were conducted in Swahili, transcribed, translated, coded, and analyzed for emerging themes. The local food system varied greatly based on AEZ. Prior to the pandemic, there was existing abiotic, such as rainfall and temperature, and biotic stressors, such as pest and disease, that varied based on the community's location within the country. These stressors reflected agricultural calendars in terms of planting times. For this, the impact of the mitigation strategies greatly varied based on AEZ's agricultural calendar when the strategies were put into place, since the timing of planting varied across the country. Zones that planted before the pandemic could have their usual access to inputs and therefore faced fewer challenges. However, those that planted after the strategies were put into place were affected by reduced access to labor, inputs, and credit. For these farmers, decisions were made based on their needs and what was available locally. There is reduction in access to inputs, services, and labor. Many did not have physical and economic access to agrochemicals and seed to improve their yields and resorted to various coping mechanisms. As the top quote shows, a female in the lowland tropics indicated that she planted local varieties since she could not afford seed after her business closed. While extension services were mainly still available, few services were being received by the families in our interviews. They also indicated difficulty in obtaining a bank loan as banks feared their ability to pay it back. Labor was impacted by mechanization and labor access. Farmers coped with this with manual labor, as the bottom quote shows how a farmer in the dry transitional zone could not afford agrochemicals and so used a bucket to spread her inputs. These effects on the food supply chain led to effects on diets in terms of availability, price, and consumption. There was a general decrease in the availability of diverse foods, especially in the highlands, which planted late. And prices increased, as a male in the top quote explains, the scarcity and expense of food. There was a decreased consumption of nutritious foods, particularly in the lowlands who applied their inputs late, and an increase in staple food consumption. However, with market closures, a temporary increase in home consumption provided a buffer to poor nutrition, indicated in this bottom quote, as the household had milk production without buyers to sell their product to, so their children would consume it. As a female explained with her banana farm, these buffers were not adequate to provide a diverse diet. Regarding distance from the market, we found the most frequent mentions of decreased availability to come from the communities closer to market. In contrast, those further from market reported the most increases in food prices and decreases in consumption. Overall, there was high variability in the consumption of meat, fish, eggs, cereal, and fruit. The quote shows how these price increases reflected the increased transportation price and influence on the food supply chain. The highest level of person of concern from both genders was the loss of employment and reduction in income, both issues influencing the food environment. A female indicated that her children lost their jobs and now have issues accessing basic needs. Men emphasized more financial concerns, such as lack of buyers in markets and increased costs with children home from school. Women indicated fearing infection and worries of children's risk behaviors, such as pregnancy, crime, and drugs. Women also indicated a decrease in many vegetable consumptions. Individuals, such as this male, indicated the difficulty in following these mitigation measures as they cannot stay home when their family has nothing to eat. There are nation-level pandemic mitigation strategies, but local impacts on the food system and household food security. We suggest the consideration of subnational strategies as the crisis continues. Given the context of rural environments, the location factors relating to AEZ and market access need to be considered. Safety nets should be put into place to address the current and future shocks. Tele-interviews can evaluate future shocks by providing a quick insight into community experiences. And I would like to open up the floor for any questions.